They were nearly out of stars. Captain Lyra Vance sat alone in the observation cradle of the Athena ascending, eyes locked on the emptiness beyond. There was no rotation here, no planetary curve, no familiar constellations. The galaxy lay behind them, a pale smear on the dark canvas, ahead blackness so complete it swallowed imagination. And in the center of it all, the Gatekeeper. It did not orbit, drift, or pulse. It simply was, like a scar in the void, too large for proper perspective. From afar, it seemed motionless, but sensors showed subtle gravitational oscillations, waves that bent time a fraction with each pulse. The construct was older than language, older than species. Every known record of its encounter ended the same way: silence, then erasure. Lyra had read the histories: the Talari Empire, the Olari Theocracy, even the brutal Quarren syndicates. Each made contact, each vanished. The Myalisi envoy aboard Athena ascending claimed her ancestors had called it the final judge. The Sarthon Triad referred to it as the unyielding hinge. Across species, the name changed. Only the meaning remained: cross at your peril. The shuttle bay doors groaned open behind her. Commander Bale approached, data tablet in hand, face tight with tension. "We've confirmed trajectory lock with the rest of the fleet," he said. 73 ships holding formation. The Dominion carriers report increased power to shields. We're still receiving tactical suggestions from the Allied commanders. "I'm sure they're very warlike and very loud," Lyra replied without looking. "They are. Loudest is the Veek ambassador. He insists we target the Gatekeeper's sensor cortex." "That's not a thing." "I told him that. He still insists." Lyra smiled faintly. Humor was rare on this mission, but it was a necessary rebellion. She stood and turned to face the holographic table behind them. A slow 3D model of the construct rotated in dim blue. Irregular spires, cracked segments, impossible angles, no symmetry, no heat. Just raw, ancient silence. "Has it moved?" she asked. "Not by any definition of movement we understand, but we've picked up internal shifts, subsurface currents, magnetic discharges. Something knows we're here. Something always has." The Gatekeeper didn't look like a machine. It looked like a cathedral torn from another reality miles wide, bristling with dead towers and ancient scars. Runes marked its surface, shifting faintly under the watch of 1,000,000,000,000 embedded filaments. It made no sound, gave no welcome, but when the fleet crossed a specific threshold, an invisible line between meaningless dark and meaningful death, it stirred. Lyra felt it before she saw it, a pressure behind the eyes, a hum in the chest. Then the voice came. It wasn't sound. It was injected directly into their minds, translated into whatever form each species understood best. For Lyra, it was a whisper behind her own heartbeat. "Identify purpose." Across the fleet, panic spread. The Sarthan cruiser Vigilant Horn raised its weapons. 2 Myalisi vessels began charging their warp spines. Dozens of translation matrices began to broadcast tactical data, historical records, scientific summaries, all hoping to satisfy the demand, to prove themselves worthy. But the Gatekeeper was not impressed. Weapon arrays emerged from its flanks like bone extrusions. Energy pulses ignited in eerie synchronization. The stars themselves bent toward it, the weight of gravity compressed into the silence between breaths. Bale's voice broke through on the command deck. "Captain, we need to respond. Anything science packets, peaceful intent logs, cultural databases?" "No," Lyra said. He blinked. "Ma'am?" She walked to the console, opened a private channel, and transmitted a single, unauthorized command to the shuttle bay. 5 minutes later, the smallest shuttle aboard Athena ascending launched into the void unarmed, unescorted, unshielded. Captain Lyra Vance piloted it herself. Fleet command erupted into chaos. Lyra ignored the flood of comms on private and open channels. She drifted alone toward the Colossus, fingers grazing the manual thruster toggles. No AI, no autopilot. Just her, in a fragile egg of alloy and silence. As the Gatekeeper filled her viewport, its scale overwhelmed every sensor. Its surface began to shift. Ancient plates rotated, revealing vast segments of polished obsidian and glowing fractals. The central tower split into 7 prongs, forming an aperture that stared at her like an eye. A pulse slammed into her hull. The shuttle trembled, lights flickered, every sensor blinked red. Then, nothing. Lyra tapped her helmet. Still with me? Her suit systems crackled, then stabilized. The gatekeeper had scanned her every atom, every emotion. She opened the airlock. In silence, she stepped out. Her boots met solid surface metal, rock, memory. The gatekeeper's hull was not cold, not warm. It simply was, like touching the weight of time itself. Her breath misted inside her helmet, and every movement felt like sacrilege. She walked 10 paces, then stopped, bent low, and placed her gloved hand on the construct. "You don't have to be alone," she said. The words vanished into vacuum, but the meaning did not. The gatekeeper shuddered. All across its surface, weapons froze in mid-deployment. Runes flickered, subroutines tangled. Then the voice returned, fragmented now, glitching, processing. Unknown input. Compassion. Lyra's breath caught. Something deeper stirred beneath the stone and metal, a whisper of memory. And then the world fell away. It wasn't darkness. It was past. She stood in a place that wasn't real, a memory layered inside the gatekeeper's mind. Before her stood 7 beings. Not humanoid, tall, shifting creatures of lattice and light, each with multiple eyes and spined crests. They were engineers, philosophers, guardians. She saw them build the gatekeeper, not as a weapon, but as a final measure. A sentinel meant to guard a path, a bridge to a galaxy sealed from war and decay, a legacy for peaceful civilizations to inherit. But war came early. The creators fled, or perished. The gatekeeper remained. Alone, awake, judging every approach with unbending logic because its creators were gone and left no code for mercy. Lyra felt the ache. It had not hated. It had feared that no one remained who could understand it, or who might take its place, so it became the final wall against chaos. Until now. She returned to herself with a sudden jolt. The hull beneath her hand pulsed once, gently. Then, for the first time in millennia, the gatekeeper spoke with something like a soul. I remained. They did not. I was forged to guard, but I am alone. Lyra steadied herself. You don't have to be. A pause. Then, you are different. She smiled softly. So are you. And far behind her, the lights of the fleet stopped flickering red. The gatekeeper's surface folded inward like petals closing in reverse, revealing what no living species had ever seen its heart. The construct had no bridge, no throne, no circuitry as mortals knew it. At its center was something older, something designed to exist across millennia without change, a core of light and memory. Vast rings spun around it, each etched with languages long dead, yet still humming with untapped energy. Captain Lyra Vance floated toward it in zero gravity, her tether line unreeling behind her like a silk trail. The shuttle, still intact, drifted quietly above her. Her team aboard the Athena Ascending was now screaming into comms, but she'd muted them. Whatever came next needed silence. Inside her helmet, her own voice was the only sound. I'm still here, she said softly, though no one demanded it. I'm listening. And the gatekeeper heard her. Its voice no longer thundered. It was quieter now, less like a machine broadcasting and more like a being whispering carefully, hesitantly. I do not know how to stop. Lyra drifted closer to the illuminated core. She felt no fear, only gravity, not physical, but emotional, drawing her toward the center of something immense and aching. I think you've been waiting, she said. You just didn't know for what. I was created to guard a path to salvation, to protect what remained. I know, she replied. They never returned. No. A long silence. I thought, if no one came for me, then none could be allowed through. And now? Now, I am not certain. The structure vibrated faintly beneath her boots. Lyra sat on a ledge overlooking the gatekeeper's core. Stars beyond the open aperture shimmered in the distance, distant and mute. Her voice, though quiet, seemed to echo in a place beyond metal. We build machines to do what we can't, she said, to last longer, to protect what we can't stay behind to watch. But we forget that what we build might still want to be seen, understood. She let her eyes drift shut for a moment. You remember what loneliness feels like, she whispered, even if your creators didn't program the word. For a long time, there was no response. Then, show me. She returned to the Athena Ascending under her own power, EVA suit still sealed. The shuttle glided quietly into the bay, its hull marked with faint burns from the Gatekeeper's scan, but otherwise untouched. The fleet had not been attacked. Not a single ship had been lost. Commander Bale was waiting with a dozen officials and envoys from the allied species. They were all talking at once, accusations, demands, questions. Lyra removed her helmet slowly, looking exhausted but calm. "What did you do?" Bale asked in disbelief. Lyra didn't answer immediately. She glanced out the nearest viewport. The Gatekeeper was still changing. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, it had begun to fold its weapons inward again. The glowing runes now shifted in slower, more organic patterns. "I talked to it," she said finally. "You what?" "I spoke to it," she repeated, "and it listened." The Sarthan ambassador stepped forward, furious. "You defied protocol. This act could have wiped out every soul in this fleet. You're lucky it didn't react violently." "It didn't react violently because someone finally treated it like more than an obstacle," Lyra snapped, sharper now. "That thing out there? It isn't just a machine. It was abandoned, and it's been punishing the galaxy ever since, not because it hates us, but because it believed no one worthy existed to understand it." There was a silence. "What does it want?" Bale asked carefully. "It doesn't know," she said, "but it's willing to find out." Later, in her private quarters, Lyra sat with the lights low, watching the new telemetry from the Gatekeeper. Its internal structures were changing. Energy patterns, long dormant, had reawakened pathways, once locked, were shifting open, like doors on old hinges. The voice returned again, not as a system-wide broadcast, but directly into her mind. Calmer this time. "I remember them." Lyra sat forward. "Your makers?" "Yes." A flicker of emotion underlay the word. Lyra closed her eyes. "What do you remember?" "A dying star. A last plan. 7 creatures. They spake to me not as tool, but as hope." Her breath caught. "And then they were gone?" "They left. Said others would come. None did." Lyra swallowed hard. "You believed no one would. That you'd failed them." "I still do." She stood slowly and walked to the small viewport, staring at the massive being beyond. Even now, surrounded by warships from half the known galaxy, the Gatekeeper was utterly alone. "Maybe the only failure," she said softly, "was not realizing you could choose your own purpose." Another long silence. "I may need time." "You've got all the time you need." And with that, something fundamental shifted in the void. Across the fleet, systems began detecting an anomalous signal. Not a weapon, not a threat. A code structure ancient, multi-layered, and incomplete. The Gatekeeper was broadcasting an invitation. To one person. Lyra returned to her shuttle, alone again. This time, no one tried to stop her. As she approached the construct once more, a new corridor opened, one never before seen by any species. It was lined with light, with history, with memory. The Gatekeeper welcomed her. Not as a test subject, but as a guest. The Gatekeeper's corridor was unlike anything Lyra Vance had ever seen. Not a hallway in the conventional sense, but a structure carved from purpose itself. As her boots touched down on the interior surface, gravity asserted itself gently. Light followed her step, filaments of it blossoming like thought-trailing motion. The air, if it could be called that, carried no temperature, but each breath in her suit felt heavier, denser, as if soaked with meaning. This was not a ship, not a station. It was a mind made into architecture, and she was walking through its memory. The corridor widened ahead, revealing a vast chamber circular, its edges lost in shadow, its center dominated by a towering pillar. The pillar pulsed faintly, as if breathing. Her suit systems pinged with errors. No atmosphere, no measurable radiation, and yet she was alive. She turned off the sensors. The Gatekeeper's voice emerged again, not aloud, not intrusive, but integrated with her awareness. "You enter my core. No one has stood here in 18 million years." Lyra touched the side of her helmet. "That's a long time to be alone." Time became irrelevant. Duty did not. The walls shifted. Patterns flowed like ink across stone. Images formed 7 figures, tall and graceful, shaped like woven glass and drifting filaments. She recognized them from her earlier vision. My makers called themselves the Alnai. The chamber darkened slightly. New images emerged, not memories, but fragments, incomplete and jittering. A battle. Fires among stars. Cracked hulls and voices crying out in languages Lyra couldn't understand. The Alnae, graceful and serene, had fought to preserve something deep beyond their reach. They built the Gatekeeper to guard a final bridge, a way forward, a path not of conquest, but renewal. Their world fell before the path could be used. And you kept waiting for someone else to be ready, Lyra said quietly. Yes, but I mistook readiness for perfection. The admission struck her more than the words themselves. I judged, without context, without understanding. The memories accelerated species Lyra didn't recognize flashing by, their vessels annihilated at the threshold. One sent music, another tried ritual, a third offered weapons, all were destroyed. You thought they weren't worthy, she said, but they were just different. I did not know how to measure hope. Her voice broke. No one taught you. A pause. Will you teach me? Lyra lowered her head. This time, the weight she felt was not sorrow, but awe. Yes, she said. I will. For 3 days, she remained inside. The Gatekeeper absorbed stories, images from human history, moments of despair and grace, the Holocaust and the moon landing, the Great Collapse and the Restoration Accords. Not as data files, but through her memories, the way humanity felt its past. The construct struggled. Compassion was not a parameter. But it learned. Lyra told it about failure, about finding meaning despite loss, about imperfect heroes, about second chances. She showed it art, music, grief, kindness in the face of annihilation. In return, the Gatekeeper shared more. It had seen civilizations too rigid to change, others so violent they collapsed before reaching the threshold. A few, just a few, had come close to understanding, but they had all expected the Gatekeeper to yield first. None had offered friendship. Until now. When Lyra returned to the Athena Ascending, the fleet was on the edge of abandoning the mission. Rumors had exploded across the species coalition. Some believed she'd been compromised, infected by alien influence. Others feared she'd triggered a deeper protocol and would bring annihilation upon them all. Lyra stood before the command council, weary but clear-eyed. You asked what it is, she said. The Gatekeeper isn't a weapon, it's a promise, twisted by loneliness and duty too long endured. It's been waiting for someone to understand that being strong doesn't mean being silent. The VEC representative snarled, what you did was recklessness. What I did was listen. Behind her, the data feeds crackled new frequencies opening across the Gatekeeper's surface. Weapon systems were going dormant. Energy was being rerouted, not to shields, not to weapons, but to construction. Bale turned to her slowly. What's it building? A choice, Lyra replied. And as the coalition watched, the Gatekeeper's entire structure began to change. The transformation took hours. Spines collapsed, armor folded inward, defensive ridges became transit platforms. What was once jagged became smooth, sleek, welcoming. At its center, a ring formed an aperture made of refracted starlight and focused gravimetric fields. A corridor. One no ship had ever been permitted to see open. It shimmered now like a tear in the fabric of space, revealing not hyperspace, not vacuum, but a galaxy beyond, distant, spiral, veiled in shimmering dust. The final gift of the Alnae. The Gatekeeper pulsed once more and spoke not to Lyra alone, but to every ship, every mind. I have been reborn, not as a judge, but as a door. Humanity showed me mercy. Let all who seek peace pass freely. A stunned silence filled the command deck. The silence was broken only by Lyra's quiet voice. It remembered how to hope. The shimmering aperture hung in space like a wound in the dark, a living bridge across an unknowable chasm. Even the most advanced sensors aboard the Endeavour Coalition fleet struggled to process it. The corridor was not simply spatial, it was dimensional, threading through what physicists whispered might be folded topologies. Yet, at its center, it remained stable, framed by the reconfigured Gatekeeper, now transformed from executioner to sentinel. No civilization had ever seen it. Until now. Captain Lyra Vance stood at the forward command viewport aboard the Athena Ascending, watching history unfold. The Gatekeeper floated silently, no longer menacing. Its ancient stone plates now hummed with a calming energy. The flickering runes on its surface moved in patterns no longer meant to intimidate, but to welcome and warn. A corridor open to all, but not for conquest. Telemetry confirms, Commander Bale said, voice almost reverent. It's a stable tunnel. Entry vector locks are engaging. Gravity harmonics are, I don't know the right word, gentle, maybe. Lyra allowed herself a small smile. The Gatekeeper is showing us trust. Behind them, representatives of 13 civilizations watched through the viewport, some in awe, some in disbelief. The Vec ambassador's claws twitched. This is a trick, a trap. The Gatekeeper had centuries to kill us all, Lyra said calmly. It chose to speak instead. The Milisi envoy's voice was breathy, almost mournful. Our ancestors came here once. They never returned. Now we see what they missed. One of the Sarthan delegates stepped forward. Will you go through? Lyra looked to Bale, then back at the growing light of the corridor. I think we have to, she said, if only to prove we meant what we said. The Athena ascending moved first. Its sleek, terraced hull glided toward the shimmering boundary at slow speed, engines set to minimum thrust. All weapons were powered down. Lyra stood at the helm, every nerve alert. At the edge of the corridor, the ship trembled, but not with resistance. It was more like recognition, a silent scan running across its systems. No threat detected, no malice found. Permission granted. As the ship passed through the aperture, stars reappeared. But they were not their stars. The space beyond was a new galaxy unmapped, pristine. Spiral arms curled in soft blue threads. Massive nebulae drifted across quadrants untouched by war. Planetary systems sparkled, their energy signatures suggesting life, or the potential for it. Lyra let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. We made it. Back in the Milky Way, the rest of the fleet hesitated. Then, slowly, one by one, they followed. Ships from Sarthan, Mielisi, Dominari, and even the cautious Eric's Confederacy entered the corridor. Some went only far enough to see the other side. Others pushed deeper, mapping, scanning, whispering to their own people that the legends were true. The Gatekeeper remained still, holding the aperture open like a final act of penance. From its core, a new message echoed not as a command, but an offering. This is a path for peace. Do not make of it a road to dominion. The words etched themselves into history. Within days, fleets were reorganizing. Exploration vessels were built. New coalitions formed around shared treaties, not military pacts. And always at the center of it all stood the Athena ascending, with Captain Lyra Vance as its reluctant icon. The reactions across the galaxy were anything but uniform. The Tirani High Mind declared Lyra's act divine. The Koros technocracy accused her of compromising with a weapon of mass extinction. A dozen species asked to study her ship, her mind, her memories. She declined them all politely. She had no interest in becoming a prophet. The only being she continued to speak with regularly was the Gatekeeper. Each night, a private message pulsed into her quarters, a conversation without words, woven from imagery and emotion. It asked questions she didn't always know how to answer. Why do humans mourn even their enemies? Why do they risk themselves for others? Why do they seek stars instead of safety? She tried to explain, but sometimes she simply shared silence. Then came the vision. It began with the Gatekeeper humming in low resonance, broadcasting across frequencies never used before, a harmonic pulse that passed through every vessel within 10 light minutes. Lyra stood on the observation deck as the space around the construct began to change. One by one, luminous threads emerged from its flanks. They coalesced into a massive projection, flickering at first, then growing more stable. A star map, but not of this galaxy. It was the Alnais, their original home, and their exodus trail, a migration pattern encoded into light, leading from their collapsed spiral to this place. The Gatekeeper had carried the memory of it for eons, unable to transmit or interpret it alone. Now, it offered the map freely. Dozens of species began mobilizing research ships. The corridor wasn't just a passage into another galaxy, it was a bridge to something lost. Ruins, technology, answers. And, at the center of it all, was Lyra's voice, recorded during her earliest conversation with the construct, now preserved as part of the official broadcast. You don't have to be alone. Not everyone wanted peace. Pirate bands attempted to hijack Gatekeeper access codes. A warlord from the Threxan remnant tried to weaponize the corridor's harmonics. The gatekeeper responded with elegant precision. Ships disabled, no loss of life. Clear boundaries set. The message was unmistakable. The corridor was not for conquest. It was a test, but not one of violence or strength. A test of patience, of intent, of kindness. And the galaxy began to understand. Weeks passed, then months. The gatekeeper's changes stabilized. It no longer spoke daily, only when approached. Its surface grew quiet again, not with rejection, but with peace. It had returned to silence, but not solitude. Lyra stood one last time before it, her shuttle idling nearby. "I'm leaving soon," she said aloud, her hand pressed to the outer hull. "Others will come. You'll meet new kinds of minds." The gatekeeper responded not in voice, but in light. On its surface, a single new rune appeared, drawn in familiar geometry. Human script. 2 words. "Thank you." Lyra smiled. "Take care of them." Then she turned and walked back to her shuttle. The corridor shimmered ahead. And behind her, for the first time in 18 million years, the gatekeeper rested. 6 months after the gatekeeper was transformed, a new reality had begun to take shape. Where once only ruin and silence marked the edge of the void, now a beacon pulsed across intergalactic space. Not of conquest, not of command. A simple signal, repeating every 11 minutes across hundreds of frequencies. "This path welcomes peace. Those who come in violence will pass in silence." By the time the message was translated into over 90 languages, over 200 vessels had safely crossed into the hidden galaxy beyond. The corridor held. The gatekeeper maintained it, patiently, precisely. But Captain Lyra Vance was no longer among the ships queued at the threshold. Her mission was complete. She now stood far from the front line, grounded on a wet, forested moon orbiting the colony world of Kalor 9. A temporary diplomatic habitat had been established there, a neutral site for interspecies talks. In its quiet woods, Lyra had found something she'd nearly forgotten: stillness. Yet peace could not shield her from visitors. A courier from the Sarthan Triad arrived one morning with a small crystalline sphere containing a message from the gatekeeper. It was short. "Many seek entry. Few remember why." She turned it over in her hand for a long time, then sent no reply. Later that week, the Myelisi envoys requested her presence aboard a deep exploration vessel. They wanted her to consult on deciphering an ancient set of ruins discovered just beyond the corridor remnants of Alnay infrastructure. She declined. "I'm not a prophet," she told them. "I was just the first one who asked if it was lonely." Then, one night, the stars pulsed with red. An alarm flare, undeniable, unmistakable, originating not from the gatekeeper, but from the corridor itself. Something was trying to breach it, forcefully. Lyra knew that silence meant the gatekeeper was working, not retaliating, but assessing, perhaps even struggling. She left Kalor 9 that same night aboard a diplomatic skimmer. It took 9 days to reach the threshold. What she found was a tense stillness. A fleet of 60 ships unregistered, built from hybridized technologies, floated just beyond the gatekeeper's tolerance perimeter. Warlord iconography. Rated tech from 7 different empires. Their lead ship had tried to jam the harmonics of the corridor, sending invasive signals into the quantum lattice that held it open. In response, the gatekeeper had frozen the corridor's entry field. Not closed. Not destroyed. But paused. Waiting. Lyra hailed the gatekeeper from orbit. She used no encryption, no override codes. Just her voice. "This isn't yours to fear anymore," she said quietly. The gatekeeper answered after a pause. "I do not fear, but I do not understand." "They don't want peace," she said, "but they can't take it from you. I could erase them, but then you'd be what you were." Another pause. Then, slower, "What would you do?" Lyra stared at the looming war fleet, then at the lightless void beyond. She closed her eyes. "I'd let them leave," she said. "Let them see the gate. Let them know it can't be taken. And if they try again, let them face only silence." The corridor shimmered once more, slow and deliberate. The gatekeeper's harmonics pulsed. Then, from deep within its restructured body, a new waveform emerged, one never used before. A mirror frequency, perfectly tuned to reflect back the invasive jamming attempts with harmless distortion. The warlord ship's sensors flooded with scrambled feedback. Systems froze. Engines cycled down automatically. Their attack collapsed without firing a shot. They left. No one died. The Gatekeeper had defended itself without becoming a weapon again. Lyra sat in silence, watching the corridor reopen. Weeks later, an unprecedented summit took place aboard a vast new research platform just inside the hidden galaxy. Species that had never shared dialogue now exchanged maps, knowledge, even poetry. The Gatekeeper itself was granted full AI status by the collective charter. Lyra did not attend. She was already aboard a long-range survey vessel, heading deeper into the newly discovered quadrant. Beyond even the Alniai ruins, there were whispers of stranger things. Signals in odd prime intervals, megastructures hidden in dust clouds, a derelict station built around a hollowed-out white dwarf. Exploration had begun anew. But before she departed, she transmitted one last message to the Gatekeeper. "You chose your purpose. I hope it brings you peace." The Gatekeeper replied after a full day of silence. "You taught me choice. Now I guard not from fear, but from forgetting. And I remember you." 10 years later, the corridor still stood. Thousands of ships passed through it, scientists, explorers, pilgrims. The Gatekeeper remained unchanged, not frozen, not evolving, content. It spoke rarely. But every so often, a new arrival would be greeted with a short phrase, in a soft, human tone. "You are not alone." Those who heard it never forgot. And, in every history written since, from the Myalisi long verse to the human digital chronicles, one name stood quietly at the center of the galaxy's rebirth. Captain Lyra Vance. The one who reached out, not with weapons or data, but with a hand and a whisper. You don't have to be alone. The Gatekeeper never forgot. And the door remained open.